hi to everybody and welcome and thank you so much for joining us. As we get started, as we were talking before, if you missed it, the best way to do it is to click in the top right-hand corner of your Zoom on View. And if you select Speaker View, that will give you a larger picture of whoever's talking. And I will keep an eye on it that all of us who are not speaking are muted. So it just gives the speaker better sound. I'll try and stay on top of that, but just if you're not too familiar with Zoom, if you move your cursor in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see a bar pop up and there's a little microphone. And if your microphone is on and you don't want it to be, just click it and it will mute your microphone. Simple as that. So thank you for joining us tonight for the Surviving the Pandemic workshop, which is proudly presented by the Canadian Football Cheerleaders Alumni Organization, the CFCAO. And I'm Sharon Caddy, and I am proud to be your Executive Director for Media for the CFCAO. We are happy to know that it's not just CFCAO members who are among us this evening. And for anyone who is, just so you know, the CFCAO is, it's Canadian Football Cheerleaders Alumni. So we are a group of former CFL cheerleaders, dancers, majorettes, and we span the ages, going straight on through from the 1950s, I believe, all the way through to people who have literally just finished with their cheerleading career on the field and have been joining us as alumni members. We are a relatively new organization, but we have a growing, thriving membership with things happening in each of our CFL centers across the league. So we're pretty excited about that. Our mission is to enable former CFL cheerleaders, dancers, majorettes to connect and to promote good fellowship. We look after each other, we look out for each other. And that kind of leads us to why we are hosting an event like this one this evening. And we are really honored to be welcoming our guest speaker tonight, who is Sean Bayless. Sean, as he's speaking, if you think of questions that come to mind and you'd like to ask, when Sean is finished, we will have time to address some of those questions. But I just ask that you go into the chat box. Again, it pops up in that bottom bar when you move your cursor. If you want to type in any questions, and after his speaking, we will address some of your questions and get some answers for you. So to introduce Sean Bayless, well, where do we begin? Sean is a professional social worker. He's got expertise in all sorts of things that are like really big stuff: critical incident debriefings to organizations that due to death in the workplace, fraud, critical incidents that involve police and firemen, providing counseling for those suffering trauma. The co-established Loving Outreach, which is a self-help group for survivors of suicide, has provided wellness presentations, all sorts of major things. And you know, it's something that's interesting is that we are all going through at varying degrees, we're all going through something right now as we deal with the pandemic. And Sean is more than equipped to help all of us to understand what we're experiencing, what we're feeling, and maybe some strategies for how we can deal with it. Sean is currently the CEO of Pathstone, which is a wonderful facility that helps so many people. So I want everyone to please a warm welcome for Mr. Sean Bayless. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you very much. I hear all your claps, by the way. I'm very sensitive. So when I heard about the opportunity presented to the Canadian Football League cheerleaders, I had one thought, one saying, and one cheer that came to mind. So my thought was, my dad played for CFL Toronto Balmy Beaches in 1947. And I was hoping that maybe somebody there, of course, my dad's 91 now, maybe saw my dad running as a wide receiver down the yards of Toronto playground there. So that was my first thought when I heard about it. And I told my dad about it, and he was so excited that I was be speaking because he still watches CFL in the past years and still says CFL is better than NFL by a long shot. They have a lazy game because they get an extra fourth down and feels that's totally ridiculous. So I don't know if you've heard that comment from the old timers or not. So, and he went to Vaughan School in Toronto that lent itself to where there was about 4 of them that actually made one of the CFL teams. So he has lots of stories and pictures. So now my saying is Argos, what I remember as a kid when he used to take me to the game. So I had to throw that in there. Don't mean to compete too much with particularly those Saskatchewan Rough Riders. So, and then there's the cheer. So my high school alderman, stop, look and listen, we are the mighty Lakers. Stop, look and listen, we are the mighty Lakers. So they were my first three thoughts that came to mind. So I thought I would just share that personal part from me. And it's very cool to be able to speak to you this evening. 2 weeks ago, we acknowledged Mental Health Awareness Week, and we've come a long way. When I used to have a private practice, I used to have private waiting rooms. I'd make sure no one would cross over. It was like we could not acknowledge people having mental health issues back then. So we had to do all this type of strategizing to keep that feeling of anonymity, because people were fearful what people would think about them coming out of the office, or if they cross paths with somebody else that they may knew. And so consequently, things have really changed. I mean, mainstream media is now talking about it. You talk about it with your family. If you have grandchildren as well, you're always curious how their mental health is doing, and with even your own children, because it's finally out there that it's where you can have those open conversations, which I think is really cool. Guess what the theme was for the Awareness Week? Get real about how you feel. And, you know, I think that get real, I think this, for those who are baby boomers out there, we really influenced generations, because back in the 70s, we would say, oh, get real, or that's groovy, or that's cool, or let's get high. I'm not advocating getting high, but those were kind of the language we used back then. So I want to share a story with you. When I was a youth, I remember telling my mom stories. Some were real, some weren't so real. But the ones that were outlandish to her, she'd say, get real, Sean. Get back down to earth and really understand what's really happening here. So let's get real about how we feel about this pandemic. So I have a question to ask you, and it's a rhetorical question unless you want to share. What are the first two words or thoughts that come to mind when you hear the word COVID-19? Now I pause so you can process it. You don't have to rush yourself. Now, the two words that you have or thoughts, are they connected to fear in any capacity? And if it is, give me a thumbs up. Okay. If it's not, then it may be strength-based. Today, we are living in challenging times. There is no doubt about it. There are heightened emotional states that I've noticed at the agency here. We feel anxiety due to the uncertainty of what COVID is going to do, the depression feelings due to being socially isolated, feeling angry because of maybe the restrictions of being able to have our normal routine, feeling of losing control possibly, or just feeling overwhelmed and not really being able to name that feeling. These are real feelings, though they may be unpleasant. The issue is that are you numbing out the feeling? Are you blocking it? Are you distracting yourself? Or are you ignoring those feelings? And unfortunately, when we do those sort of strategies, this unpleasant feeling can take us to a very bad place, or a very heavy or scarier place when we aren't dealing with those feelings. I mean, I know that what's happened recently at PASTA, we look after the mental health issues with children up to the age of 18. Guess what disorder is coming out of the woodwork big time? Eating disorders. We had 65 cases last month, because all the things that are happening is one of the worst things that can take place. And then we have the anxiety and depression, but I'll get into that a little bit later. But we have good reasons to feel that sense of unpleasantness. I mean, think about it. 90% of the news on COVID is negative. The focus on TV, social media focus is on the number of deaths that cause the virus. Selling news is all about connecting to our basic fear of survival instinct, and they're playing on that piece. So that's why it has become such a focus, because people get gravitated to that fear-based thinking. Misinformation, misunderstandings. What is the truth about COVID? Mass vaccine, herd immunity. I'll get into a little bit more of that. But these are the things that has become consuming, and we become obsessed because it continually aims at our thought process that impacts us in terms of physiological. If you think about all the information in your change of lifestyle, you've had to make many adaptations. And every time you make some form of change of routine that you are familiar with, that lends itself to a stress inducing type of situation. I call it the upside down queendom or kingdom, because everything is not normal. And when that takes place, your body automatically goes into a survival mode and begins to draw on your energy to cope with that change in and of itself. So you think about it, we've had stay at home orders. They keep changing as to what that status is. We have homeschooling or virtual counseling or schooling and counseling as well, which has been very disruptive to children in terms of coping with that aspect. Some of you may have had job loss or a reduction in income. You're working from home, and for our families, particularly our counselors, a good percentage of them have children, so they've had to adapt not just to the work environment, holding the space for people, but also dealing with homeschooling and trying to do the balancing act, and them feeling the same pressure as all of us, and yet they have to counsel families. Then there's the general inflation of commodities, which a lot of people don't realize that, well, probably you do, because you probably do a lot of the grocery shopping and things of that nature, lends itself, you've seen the increase in price of that, which has caused more challenges. Now, those may have had lost a loved one. Your celebration of life was different. When you had maybe holidays, they changed with regards to this year. We did a murder mystery over virtual, which we've never done. We have these huge parties, about 35 people, and we have a real bash, and it was a very quiet, but it was a murder mystery. We did over the screen. We also have the social isolation of children from grandparents and so on down the line. But what has happened with taking this approach, it has increased the tension, and particularly if you've had any conflict with people in your family, it usually gets augmented and amplified because there's more sensitivity connected to it. I think there's sometimes more arguments that are happening in families, not just because of being together for so much, but people have different belief systems about, should we be locked down? Should we have the vaccination? Should we wear a mask or not wear a mask? There has been many conversations in family where people took different sides of the fence as to what they believed was true, which creates that much more tension, which created more challenges that way. What we do know is that the overdoses and suicide numbers are surpassing COVID deaths, particularly in Japan and other countries as well. But we know that this is something that was expected in terms of the longevity of what's happening. So let's do a self-awareness for everybody. This is a rhetorical. I just want you to kind of go through it in terms of mental process. You don't have to write anything down, but it's more of just seeing where you are at, because that's what's most important right now. Is your concentration impaired in any way in terms of being present in a conversation? Now, my partner has given me called the IBS disorder, and it's meaning irritable brain syndrome. And she's saying that I have been irritable at certain times that's not typical of how I usually deal with things. So I said, that's really cute, and said, yes, dear. And so I'm all better now, by the way. So, but it's just that we both realize that we have to be more patient with each other, because she's a chiropractor. She's with people all day. She's not used to wearing a mask. She has less oxygen. She can't work the number of hours that she used to because of that. Now, are you experiencing high or low moods? Are you excessively worrying or anxiety taking place? Are you social withdrawing? There are some characteristics on a psychological level. On a cognitive level, let's take a look at your awareness there. Now, these restrictions and lockdown have imposed a negative effect, so that's going to impact your cognitive capacity. We all know that. But what's happened with some people is they're taking more risks that they typically would not do. They're making poor choices than typically. They don't feel as altruistic or kind as they would, or be as patient with other people in a grocery store, let's say, for example. And they have more of a desire to punish people. So, like, maybe the lawyers are benefiting from that. We also find that Zoom fatigue is also playing a huge role, that it's reducing concentration, because when you're on Zoom, you're having to focus on the nonverbal much more perceptively, so that you can really read the meaning, because 80% of the meaning of your communication is nonverbal. So people are really zooming in on that, but by doing that, that's taking more of your energy as well, what a lot of people don't think of. So the other part is, have you been losing motivation in any part of your life, or not feeling that you're able to give as much as you used to? Are you suffering from any depression symptoms where there's a down feeling or a heaviness, that you just don't feel that sense of that liveness or that vibrance that people are so familiar with? Or even in your family, you're seeing that happen. Or you're feeling that the anxiety of the heart palpitations or sweating, or you're feeling uneasy and you feel like you have to pace, or you can't really relax. These are all kind of self-awareness with the cognitive. On the emotional side, are you emotionally exhausted or feeling heavy by the end of the day? That's not typical. Are you easily triggered of anger or anxiousness, or the way that you respond to your partner or your family members? There is pandemic fatigue taking place, because when you talk to people now, it's clear that people are saying, I just want this over with. I am tired. I mean, we kind of had the hope that within a year's time that we would be free to do what which we were familiar with. And all of a sudden, we just found out today in Ontario, they're locking it down for another 2 weeks. And everybody goes like, seriously. However, it is what they're doing, what they think is best. And so consequently, that impacts us. So how do we get kind of rejuvenated again? I wanted to share with you another story of my life. Basically, is where, as a professional social worker, I did trauma responses, and where I would be involved with serious incidents. Like when 9/11 took place, I went down to 9/11 and provided debriefing for the police officers down there. I've done it where there's been bank robberies, firefighters or police see something that's traumatized, or a police officer had to shoot somebody and had to deal with those feelings. And what I found was that the longer the incident occurred, and I'll give you the example of 9/11, because that incident being on TV and being on like 6 weeks before it really settled down, but still there was an aftermath of many months after that, the post-traumatic stress disorder became very real. I've always been very, very concerned with regards to the longevity of this pandemic. The first 3 months, what we found is our referrals didn't go up, by the way. Our referrals went down. And the reason is that everybody was in a surreal state and everything was kind of on pause. But after this year, I'm telling you, the number of referrals has gone sky high here. We've got twice as many referrals coming in each month, dealing with the post or the aftermath of what is the feeling of it. And I think some of the challenges that we get, this kind of sunshine coming saying we're going to finally have the vaccine, so we'll be able to get out and be playful with each other. And then all of a sudden we get another message, we're locking down again. And all of a sudden there's that hope that it's taken out of our system, and therefore that post-traumatic begins to build again in terms of the aftermath of it. Another part of my life is, I know that you've all been affected in some way. Mine has been an interesting situation. Being a social worker, being probably trying to be non-attached to what's happening, but still being very vibrant, because it was important that I stayed grounded and regulated, because my role is to hold the space for so many people in my organization that's here. They look to me with regards to how I react is going to have an impact on others. Same thing with my family. About a year ago, just after COVID started, my mom and dad lived together. And dad's 91, as I shared with you. Mom has the onset of Alzheimer's. And consequently, as this COVID continued, my mom had a fall. And dad basically was not able to lift her up off the floor. And so he had to call 911. He called 911 and they took her to the hospital. and he was not able to visit her while she was there, obviously, because of the restrictions. And then what happened was he realized, he said, Sean, I can't look after mom anymore. I got to find a home. So after about 3 months being in the hospital, because she couldn't return back to the home because the home ended up having COVID, where the ones that she was going to be placed into. So we basically got her to where they did put her into the home, and they had a major COVID outbreak that was serious, where half the residents died. She ended up getting another medical problem, and therefore they did a test with her and found out she had COVID. And then they took her to the hospital, and then they found out, they did another test and she didn't have COVID. So that created confusion. And then I was responsible with my sister to be able to make sure Dad had groceries and that, because he was homebound now. So after a year, my dad and ourselves haven't seen my mom. And by the time Dad got to see her, she had really decompensated, where she didn't know anybody anymore. So I know this is very pale compared to many other of you who have gone through tremendous suffering, but it has impacted everybody, no matter what status, who you are, how regulated you are, how grounded, and it has had a tearing. I found that what I had to do is that work was so intense with being involved with some committees, that I had to drop a few committees just to be able to restore myself, because I was so exhausted and tired. So I recognize my limitations and the importance of you recognize it, because if you keep pushing it for over a prolonged period of time, you will suffer serious consequences of whether it's depression or, basically just losing your energy and not feeling restored after a sleep. So I want to ask this question of you now. What has been your general reaction to your situation? When you reflect on your cognitive, your emotional, your reaction to family, where have you been? How have you been coping? Where do you feel it in your body, where that pressure? If I said to you right now, do a body check. So if you start from the top of your head and work all the way down, where do you feel the pressure points in your body? Because that's where yours is in your chest, okay? And that's good. Usually it's your head, your chest or your throat area, your stomach and your back are usually the top priorities. So if you have a bad back and you've injured it or it feels painful, it's because this amount of stress is impacting you as well. So consequently, that's a good way of doing about it. Now, the best thing you can do for that is if you go and you start breathing into that spot, put your mind to the spot where you feel and breathe 10 times, focusing on that, that will have a dissipating effect with regards to that stress feeling. So is your reaction fueling the emotional charge, or are you de-escalating the emotional charge? Because you're doing one or the other. If you're de-escalating it, it means that you're keeping yourself regulated. If you're escalating it, you're getting into your own drama, which is, if that's what's typically you do, some people call me drama king or drama queen in my family. I just say I'm just being passionate. Like, I see a big difference, but they say those sort of things because family can do that. And consequently, what I want to share that was somewhat of the fear-based type of feelings that happen. And I want to shift this presentation to a strength-based now. So here are some facts to think about. Did you know that 80% of the people who have passed away from COVID are above 65 years of age and typically had a compromised immune system, and obesity was connected to that as well? The majority were over 75. The last count was approximately 2.5 to 3 million people have passed due to this COVID flu pandemic. And typically in a flu season each year, it's about 1.5 million deaths per year. So those that are outside the identified population are not likely to die, which is good news when you think about it in those terms, because we want to use facts that are there to help de-escalate ourselves. So let me ask you some questions, and they're very quick questions, and so you can just say yes or no to them inside. So ask yourself, are you in this category? Second question, are you adhering to social distancing and other public health recommendations to keep yourself safe? Are your family members generally COVID-free? At this moment, what are your top 3 stresses? 1, 2, 3. What is your plan in how you're dealing with each of those stress factors? Do you have a plan as to how you're going to cope with those stress factors? Is your family aware of your support and your plan? We are people that are very resilient. People who've gone through the depression, people who've gone through wars or other catastrophes, they survive. We will survive. That's the good news with that piece of it. But take in context of what I've just asked you to live in the moment to say, are you within that framework that lends itself in the moment as staying very regulated? Because if you deal with what just is in your life, instead of getting concerned with all the other things that are happening in everybody's life and compounding that, try to make it really simple. What is your situation? What is your state of mind? And you need to take responsibility for how you react to situations, because that's what it's all about. So let's take a look at what are some of the wellness things you may be doing or you could consider doing, that what we have found and we recommend to our children and our families that are at Pastone. If your family is one who are talkative and expressive and you derive support, are you maintaining that? Are you being kind and calm to yourself and to your family? How often are you getting outside? Because what we do know is that children and families who get out and go for walks in nature, and as when I look at Donna's place with all the trees around her, we all know, well, maybe not everybody, do you know that trees give off energy? And actually on a day that's overcast, you can actually, if you look straight into the tree for about 30 seconds and then lift your eyes up, the peripheral will show the energy around the tree. Some of you may not believe that, but go and try it and see what happens, because the energy from the trees, and that's when you walk through the woods or you go by a lake or you're sitting by a fire, you're feeling it, and your body absorbs that energy and helps rejuvenate and triggers off serotonin, endorphins, and those things that keep us very calm. That's why if you go for a walk for 15 to 20 minutes, it also begins triggering off those chemicals that naturally help us feel calm and relaxed. If you're finding that you need a nap that you typically wouldn't, take the nap because your body is saying, I need a nap. Remove clutter from your rooms, because sometimes clutter makes you feel like that piece of freedom that when it's clear, your mind feels clearer. Did you know that if you walk with your shoulders back and your head square on, is that it actually reduces any feelings of depression? And as a matter of fact, if you want to do an exercise that, if you know these people who meditate, who do yoga, and who do those forms of exercise, the reason why they're so meditative is because what happens is that when you meditate, if you all took 3 breaths and focused on your breath, 1 breath, 2 breath, 3 breath, if you focused on your breath, do you realize that something happened to you where you ended up having very few thoughts in your brain? Because meditators, what they do is they actually space out their thought process, so they don't have a thought process, that there's space between their thoughts. And when that happens, you have inner peace. And so consequently, that's why people who suffer from OCD or compulsive disorders, their brain is going 100 miles an hour. Generally, we have over 60 to 70 thoughts per day. If you end up having fewer thoughts, because every thought creates an emotional reaction or some sort of chemical response in your body, so that if you meditate, all it does, it goes into the serotonin endorphins. So meditation, breathing, going for walks. Sometimes people who like to fish, it's not about fishing, it's about that quietness that they begin to feel. That's when you knit or when you do things that you get into a meditated gardening. Gardening is an excellent idea of how that meditation works. You get lost in the soil and you're fingers begin to feel it, and you're feeling the flowers, and you're all that stuff that connects with it. That's one of the best forms of meditation. For those who have children, they love stargazing. They love to dance. They love karaoke. They love all those things that create a playful dance in life. So what I'm really saying is that natural light produces that vitamin D, which we've talked about a little bit earlier on offside, I guess, or just before we started. The exposure light releases the hormones of serotonin and endorphins. And so therefore, that's why that 20 minutes outside is just absolutely awesome. When I saw my red skin, it's not that I'm embarrassed, I have sunburn because this weekend, I just loved the sunshine, but I didn't realize I should have put some of that screener on. However, when I look, I says, oh my gosh, I know I got sun. So there's vitamin D starting to be produced there. On my final note that I just want to share with you this evening is there's been a number of silver linings that have occurred. I'd like you to think of 2 silver linings in your life because of the COVID event. Just 2. Okay? When you think of those silver linings, there's something that basically what I have found is families have been spending more time with each other in terms of playing games. I'm now nearly a crib master because that's what became our game of being favorite. And unfortunately, fortunately, I had learned the game much younger. But for those in my family that didn't, I was winning a lot of games. I'm not winning as many games, so that's kind of a downside. But I am glad that we were able to connect and do those sort of things with each other and have a lot of fun. I know at work, I'm able to now do video conferencing from home where I wasn't able to do that before because it's acceptable. I know at work now is that we're able to do, our people can now work from home that they typically would not, doing virtual counseling. I'm very excited about that opportunity and allowing that piece where people may not be able to come to work because of a family matter, but they say, listen, I can still counsel from here, but I need to stay home. This is perfect for that. There's online schooling, university. Maybe we'll get a reduction in cost for our kids that are going to university because they're doing online. Maybe there'll be a reduction. I'm not saying that will happen, but maybe that's an option. There could be some savings there. Less fossil fuels being used because of less transportation. So I know that they are just kind of some highlights or a few ideas, but there is a number of silver linings, and I think in a very good way. And when we get through this, we can take some of those silver linings and apply it to what is going to be for our future. So that gives you a little bit of an overview. I hope I've been able to share from the fear base that how it's impacting, the strength base of where we can go. So do you have any questions that are there that I can answer or?
Okay. So Sean, we do have, there's a few. This one here, for the mothers who are working from home, they're working, they're homeschooling, still having to stay on top of the household, carrying the load. It's actually, I hear this from a lot of moms. It's pretty overwhelming, and their own personal self is lost in making sure everything else stays in order. Is there any advice for the moms who are trying to handle all this, like the juggling?
Well, moms are awesome because basically you're the nurturers generally, and you're the ones that have that gift of understanding and connecting on that emotional level. And I think that you're having to carry the space. And you're right, there's not an easy answer to that piece of it. What I do know is no matter whether you're the father or the mother or the position that you play, is that self-care is going to be the most important. And it's really hard to give you a formula, but self-care to me is when you identify those moments that give you that space or that break from the chaos or the challenges or the demands or the pressures that you're feeling. And meaning that if you have self-care practices, how do you work that out with your family to support you, and maybe vice versa, doing the same thing? And that's whether you're getting your 20-minute walk in or being able to enjoy the garden without having anybody with you by having somebody, cover for you. And to me, that becomes the secret of expressing yourself to your family that you're having a challenging time, that you need your own breaks as to what you describe as your own self-care, whatever that may be. So consequently, to me, it's being able to have that voice and speak it and don't need to feel guilty because of the fact that you feel that you're letting them down, when in fact, it's where you're restoring yourself so you have the energy to look after, because if you don't get the break, you are not going to have the capabilities to look after the family as well as you could if you have those breaks. It's very much like at work. You go 5 hours without taking a break, you're actually slowing down your production. If you'd taken 20 minutes or a half hour for your lunch, and therefore you get restored. So to me, you have to describe what your self-care is and structure it into your life some capacity by using the support of others.
Now, kind of piggybacking on that, we have a couple of other questions, but piggybacking on that one, I really wanted to touch on this because among our members, I know we have some moms with very young children. We
Hmm.
also have some grandparents, and I can speak to this from the grandparent perspective because we have 8.5 month old twin granddaughters and a 3-year-old grandson. So these are children who've not been in school yet, who've not done any
Yep.
of that. And we're finding that there's a socialization issue. They don't see people. They've had very little contact with the grandparents even. So there's this emotional difficulty when you go and see these children that you love, and they're crying because they're scared of you.
Hmm.
And there's very little relief for the parents because those little children are afraid of everyone. What's going to happen with these children? How are we going to manage to sort of socialize them when they can't socialize?
Yeah, I'm very concerned about. I have 3 grandchildren, and there's been that distancing, and it makes you cry basically because you want to naturally connect and you want to feel their warmth and you want to develop that relationship. And I am concerned with regards to what's this developmental delay that's occurring of that socialization. I'm not sure how that's going to look in the future, to be honest with you. And I don't think anybody really knows at this point how. I mean, fortunately, children are very adaptable. I think that it's that creativeness again through the virtual piece, that there's how you can play games with each other. I mean, at that age, what you're describing, it's very difficult to do that. Um, to me, it's kind of like where you send cards. It's doing the same things, that at least there's a normalization of traditions, if you can do that piece of it. Also, there's a piece where how do you create the connectedness through even the hearing your voice on there, or because that's what typically we do with families, is that we develop traditions that allow ourselves to feel a sense of connection and belonging. And so therefore you look at your family trying to develop maybe some of those type of traditions that can happen through Zoom. It's not a very good medium, honestly. We
It's
know
tough.
that.
You have to go somewhere where you're wearing a mask. They're not even getting the smile.
Yes, yes. Or what you can do with a mask, if you're, 20 feet away, you could always have the smile 20 feet away, because social distancing 6 feet. So you could actually do a peekaboo from a distance of 20. It's really trying to use your imagination, working within the public health realm, so that basically, because if something happens where had COVID and you'd feel guilty about that. So you stick within and trusting that social distancing of what public health has described, and working with that aspect there. And
Excellent.
again, if the mask is, especially if you have a mask and you're hugging, that's where you can feel that sense of connectedness. And it's not about the face, it's about the warmth that one is experiencing. So these are just some of the things. And again, it's that creative. And the other part is, I would talk with other people with grandparents who are also have found ways of reconnecting,
Mhm.
or sending brownies, or, well, I like brownies, by the way, but sending something like little gifts or whatever, in terms that you're thinking of them, because it's just like they won't comprehend everything, but I believe in an energetic experience that happens between people, that it's the invisible level of love, for example. To me, it's how do you create that pathway that love is being expressed in such a way that creates that sense of connectedness and belonging.
Okay. Here's a question I think probably most of us can relate to with some degree from Mary. What do you recommend when you can't sleep anymore and you're constantly getting up during the night? And I think I see a lot of nodding on this one.
Yeah, and that's typically a sign of worry and fear, and also that your system's out of whack with regards to that's really professional, out of whack. What I mean by that is it's where you've moved away from your normalization of your regular routine. Now, sleeping pattern is probably one of the most important patterns to maintain, because it lends to if you don't get enough sleep, you can go through a psychosis. And I will share another personal story to give you an example. Is one of my family members, which is very close to me, I don't want to identify exactly. um, she ended up having sleep insomnia and also had a preconditioned mental health issue. We had to, because of the tension, the fear, not sleeping well, she ended up having to be placed into a psychiatric hospital for 6 weeks. So I know the importance of that sleep pattern. So the question is sometimes you have to experiment with a number of different aspects. One, some people attempt to use gravel. Some people attempt to have warm milk because of the ingredients that are there can have that impact. It's important that you keep to the routine that you best can. If you cannot get a full night's sleep and you can realize it's affecting your energy, you need to speak to your family physician to be able to maybe look at some sort of mild tranquilizer or something that just gives you the edge to be able to get to sleep. It means that doing exercise at a certain time of day may give you that sense where your body gets that peace where it can relax. Eating the foods that you know that are healthy also plays a role. If you know that tea or coffee at nighttime is causing that caffeine and get your system sped up, we know that if you're doing a lot of computer and video, that also can impact your brain and therefore disrupt sleep. So I don't know what particularly routine. You may want to write out the routine, what you're doing, and see what impact it's having. And then you begin to do some reading on it and try some of the things I'm talking to you about, to experiment and speak to your family physician specifically, because to me, there may be a room for medication. I am not a pill pusher by any means as a social worker. I always believe take the natural approach, whether it has to do with exercise and eating particularly and getting into routine. But if you have gone to such a state that you are no longer, where your mind is racing, your heart is racing, that you're restless at night, once that routine's in place for a prolonged period of time, sometimes you need medication just to help you get back into the routine and then move forward with, hopefully that can remediate it.
Okay, we have one here from Tiffany, and this one goes to motivation, and it's something we've seen affected. And I know we have a number of members who either teach dance or have sort of this sort of thing. Tiffany does teach dance. She has a dance school. And the question is, any tips to motivate my dance students, elementary school age kids? They have a complete lack of motivation now that after school sports have been canceled for so long.
Yeah.
Looking to help them cope with being stuck at home and at the same time not lose their love of dance.
Yeah. Well, there is that impact that's happening, that lethargy that takes place with regards to kids. I know of one dance school in our area that they do it virtually now, and I'm not sure if they're doing it virtually, but they've made it into a lot of playfulness for them with regards to how they've changed the way of the dance and competitions with each other. I don't know all the details, but that is one aspect. To me, is people gravitate to those who have high energy or who are vibrant or who have purpose in their life and who have meaning, and they seem to gravitate towards that. To me, living your life on purpose, with living with that moment, that's what's most important, is going to have an influence on your kids or those people who you're trying to motivate. Motivation is that they have to find some sort of drive, but, and I get it, that right now, that when kids get to the level of being lethargic, we do know that here we found out evidence basically by through research that we realize that mental health challenges are directly connected to this new age of video and cell phones, and how all those notifications and dings creates an adrenaline rush, and therefore they feel they're loved and they're connected because of all those things. So we know that if they're watching too much video and that as a pastime, we know that it impacts the cognitive, that causes I would say signs of depression, or really what happens is they get anxious, and the anxiety feeling, and the way they actually counteract it is by becoming depressed. And depression is really a defense mechanism of not feeling so anxious. And so they get into that cycle. As a matter of fact, if you do reading, you can find out that basically Facebook, um, and what are some, and those video games and the cell phones, the designers of them actually design it so it connects to the addiction system, that people get addicted, so they use the data. And those very people that actually set that system up are actually doing presentations telling people that what they did and what we have to begin to limit our kids having so much video time. because I guess it got to their conscience that they realized what they have done and it caused this generation where basically people have developed addiction for that video games and cell phones and the notifications and all those sort of things.
Okay. Now there's a question again, another one I know we're pretty much all dealing with, but from Seven, do you have any tips on how to balance work and personal time? Because work is there all the time now.
That's a tough one, and
You
it's
definitely
tough
are.
because I'm somewhat of a hypocrite, and that's why I'm being self-acknowledging that I don't put I have been one that works long hours, but I thoroughly thrive on it and I feel good about it, and so um, the balancing I'm an empty nester too in that sense, so I don't have children because they're all grown up now, so I don't have that same concern. But the balance to me, it's really something that you have to decide. If you recognize it, that you know you're out of balance, it's having the ability to discipline yourself. No different than as a cheerleader when you had to do your choreography, you had to memorize your moves. There was a lot of work that went into the work that you did to perform. And to me, it's that same discipline applying to your life with regards to developing a structure, a routine that allows you to live something you know that's comfortable. If you take that moment just to kind of feel inside that you're feeling stress and you're feeling demands and you're not listening to that inner voice, you are responsible and you're the only person that can really shift that. And usually what happens is that you end up getting physically ill, or you end up having a serious element of something that makes you think and pause as to what it is that needs to change. And typically, for most human beings, we wait for the painful experience to take place in our life. That becomes our wake up. And then the pain says, I don't want to feel this anymore. And therefore, we change our lifestyle. We typically don't do it until we start feeling some of that pain. And so consequently, if you're starting to feel it, that means you got to change your structure and your routine to get that which you feel healthy again.
Okay.
Easier said than done.
Yeah. A couple more questions coming up. So this one is quite interesting from Kaylee Supersad. She says, the students I work with are visually impaired or blind. They rely on the physical touch and in-person learning to teach life skills and independence. Any tips to encourage them? A lot of them are lacking self-esteem and confidence.
Are these, I guess the question I have is this where they're able to have physical touch, or is it because of virtual that's the challenge?
Yeah, I know personally, I have a friend who's blind, and he has talked about this to me, saying it's really difficult. Kaylee is saying because of virtual.
Yeah, I think that's a universal challenge we all have, and I think that's our major challenge why we feel so cooped up in that aspect. I don't have a lot of recommendations because it's one that I'm stretching, trying to figure out little things like, as I was describing earlier, some of those recommendations of figuring out something that's playful through virtual, but it's very limited. And until we can get into that social interaction, those people that either you're working with is really saying to them, getting them to become creative or coming up with ideas of them getting where they can get physical contact because of family and that aspect. But that's a very difficult means of trying to figure what that out is, to be honest with you, because this virtual, as we can see, I don't like, I'm so used to being in crowds where I talk to people, I can pick up stuff really easy and I can move the audience. I can just feel that energy in the flow. On virtual, it's more stilted, it's stiff. It's like, I'm trying to feel vibrant. I hope you're feeling some energy there, but it's not the same. It's because my magnetic field that I have when I'm in an audience, it's like I just put it out there. And you all know how some people are very charismatic and they can do that, but it's not quite the same. It's like going to a concert. Like, I like Neil Diamond, and when you go to a concert, you feel that energy, everybody's going, woo! But when you see them on TV, you kind of feel it, but it's not nearly the same impact. That's the challenge of our system that we have with virtual.
Okay. And our last question that's coming from the group is from Rianne, and she wants to know more about with seniors. And we're not talking about seniors who are in long-term care or seniors' homes, but seniors who are living at home and dealing with all the restrictions we have and trying to manage staying healthy. How can we, their kids and the grandkids and everybody, manage the emotions and helping them and staying in touch while respecting all of the restrictions we need to take care of.
Well, I heard a few things that some people did that I thought was really interesting. So when there was an anniversary for an older couple, all the family got in their cars and they drove by with signs and honked the horn and they let them know that they were coming. And then they put cards up there. So that was pretty creative in terms of that aspect. And so to me, it's where it's the phone call because when you hear someone's voice, like even though my mom doesn't recognize who I am, but dad will put her on the phone, and yes, she has this nonsensible language that she's using, but I hear certain words, and all of a sudden there's something that connects, and we call her Sweetie Graham, by the way. And so I say, "Hey, Sweetie Graham, how you doing?" And so she's, "Oh, that's nice." And it's those moments of the connection that happens. So the phone calls are important, and telling your stories to these people, whether whoever they are, like even it's like you have, if a story happened that day, they want to hear anything. Like my dad, because of mom not being there anymore, so he went through quite an adjustment. So I'm generally calling him every day, and I just kind of give him a story of something that I did today, whether it was good, bad, or the ugly. But he wants just to hear the stories of that sense of connectedness. Also, because I'm an essential worker because I buy groceries for him, so I get to have that connection with him as well. So I take the necessary precautions, and he feels safe with what I'm doing, and therefore I will make him the meal, and just to kind of do something of that. It's those little things. It doesn't have to be something big, but in your family, your traditions or anything that's connected to a tradition or a routine that that created a connectedness with your family. That's what I would suggest is capture that, and how do you modify it or symbolically represent it so they can feel that generation of connectedness.
Yeah. And Patty kind of wants to just take this a teeny bit further with another, because there are some elderly couples who are blessed enough to still be together and living together, but they're living together, cooped up in a house 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with very little interaction outside of that bubble. And so, and it's almost sad to think there are couples that have been married 50, 60 years, and there's a tension and an anger and there's stress.
Mm-hmm.
How can that be dealt with?
Well, again, I don't know what their walking capacity is, because sometimes they don't have that. Again, it's something where when you're cooped up and if you can't get out, you can play only so many card games. There's not much conversation because you can't create stories of stimulation unless they hear stories from other people. The bottom line is if people can get out of their place in terms of going for a drive or being able to just sit on a bench outside the apartment or their house, those things of just listening to nature and doing those things are helpful. But it's something, again, it's the people who are most creative are the ones who are surviving the best. And if you have a creative mind, then pass the creativity of ideas to other people. And there's lots of things online with regards to, like even at Pastone, we have videos about education about things, or we actually had a paint night for the kids in terms of virtual. So we became creative here of different ways of interacting on a counseling level so our kids could feel connected with their counselor. So I'm sure there is websites out there too that basically is about older folks. Put it, Google it, and see what they have with ideas of surviving. Because I know the government's put out websites as well to be able to provide ideas and suggestions as to live well and be well.
And I was going to make that one the last question, but we snuck one more in, and I am going to ask it because we've talked about families and moms and parents and grandparents, but what about people who are alone? Cassidy would like to know any tips for people who are single, who live alone, and that's a whole other level of isolation.
Yeah, I would have to understand more with regards to them being single and their type of lifestyle. Like, is their lifestyle been really, how much has it been hampered, and what are they doing to reconnect with that lifestyle that they have? Like, it's like some single people are right out there, other single people are more isolated naturally. So to me, again, is a single person, they can, if they have a routine, whether it's the exercise or whether it's certain friends, like there is provision in different locations based on what the public health, you got to capitalize on the provision that's available to make it. But I think when you said, Sharon, earlier, is that, with the kids going lethargic, it's because they kind of get your brain, after your brain ends up after 3 weeks doing the same thing, whether it's from being really active or not being. It's kind of like your weight, basically, or your diet. If you stick to a program for 3 weeks, you can change that which has happened. But if you don't stick for 3 weeks to that new diet program, you're usually going to go back to the old way that you ate. But what we do know, it takes 3 weeks. So what we're saying that is somebody who's isolated themselves and didn't know what to do for themselves and just stayed. Therefore, they've got to find a new structure, and it's going to take them at least 3 weeks to break the pattern and 3 weeks more to maintain the pattern. So therefore, a person who's single needs to develop a routine of, I'm going to wake up in the morning, I'm going to have a shower. Hygiene is really important. Then I'm going to have my breakfast. Then I'm going to go for a walk. Then I'm going to do my job. Then I'm going to make lunch. Then I'm going to have another type of fun exercise. I'm going to call up my parents, call up a family member, call up a friend. They need to get into that routine, but it'll take them 3 weeks to get into whatever they've written down as their routine. And so that's really for anybody. But that 3 weeks is really critical to stick to it, because that's your brain will go back to what's most familiar to it. And that's because there's a comfort and a familiarity, and that's what the brain likes to do. So that's why COVID has created our brains to go mush in that sense. That lends itself that if when we realize that we're not living a healthy lifestyle, we need to develop a routine, get it in for 3 weeks and do it no matter what. Even when the brain says, I don't feel like it, I'm going to skip it. No, you don't. You stick to it for 3 weeks, and all of a sudden it becomes the pattern. The brain expects you to do that. And that's why people who exercise for years and years and years, if they stop, they feel atrophy and they feel pain. They say, I got to get back to this routine. So that's how the brain typically works in terms of the average person.
Excellent. So thanks for answering so many questions, and thank you everyone for asking such great questions. But before we let you go, I just wanted to quickly ask you, Pathstone mentalhealth.ca, tell us just briefly a little bit about Pathstone.
Pathstone is the lead agency in the Niagara region, but we're by Niagara Falls and Fort Erie and St. Catharines. And what we do is we provide treatment for those children who suffer from depression, anxiety, self-harm, and family challenges that are going on. And so all our social workers, that's our role, is to help balance these families so that these kids can thrive. And I think because of what's happened, not with just COVID, but with the people saying it's okay to talk about it through Bell type of thing, they're talking about it. And so referrals have actually increased 20% each year for the past 4 years, which I think is good news, because that means they're getting the help that they need, which is really exciting. And our social workers here have done phenomenal in terms of balancing their own life and staying very focused. We had a wait list of 8 months to 18 months 4 years ago, and we're now down to, till this last 2 months, we had no wait times at all. But now with one of our programs, we have basically a 2-month, but we're looking at how to remedy that. So that's the role that we have. And most places have these children mental health centers that's their focus, because really, if you look at it, that if we don't have governments investing in our children with regards to mental health, they are going to lead to a life of serious mental and persistent mental health as adults and addictions. And consequently, they go into the hospital, and the cost of the hospital is sky high. So that's why governments finally are waking up to start investing in providing enough counselors to be able to look after the children, because in the long run, it will save taxpayers millions and billions of dollars. And also, we don't want to see our kids struggle, as the bottom line.
Well, that sounds great. Thank you so much. And thank you for taking the time with us today. We're getting lots of thank yous coming through on the messages. It's so appreciated. Lots of great advice. And just sometimes just to hear someone and answer our questions, talk it out, I think that also goes a long way to helping easing our minds. And for joining us today and providing such great information and advice, the CFCAO is happy to be making a donation to Pathstone and helping with the great work that you're doing there. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And I really enjoyed it. It was so much fun putting this presentation together because you brought me closer to my dad because first thing he wants me to do is call him and saying, how did it go? And I'll say, Dad, they recognized you. Joke. That's a joke. Humor is the best thing going. So watch some videos that have lots of humor in it as well. So,
I loved your cheers, but I'm sorry. For me, it's Oski Wee Wee.
dear.
Sorry, man. That's just the way it is. So if anybody wants to learn more, pathstonementalhealth.ca, they can check out Pathstone there. I want to remind everyone, of course, CFCAO.ca, that's where we are. And this has all been recorded and we'll be making this available. So for anyone that wasn't able to join us, it can be shared. I think there was a lot of really good discussion here today and hopefully it's helped everyone. Thank you so much, Sean.
You're very welcome. Thank you, everyone.
And
Bye.
thank you everyone for joining us.
Cheers. It was wonderful.